Well, I love an older son, don't you? Any of you older out there? You know, I'm an eldest son, and it's interesting, right? Because I have four younger sisters, right? What's great about this is I almost always get the same reaction from everyone who finds out, right? It's the get to know you. It's the, hey, do you have any brothers and sisters? Yeah, actually, I have four younger sisters. And they almost always say three things, right? The first one they say, and you're the only boy. The second one they say, and you're the oldest. And then they just say, my goodness. And it's instant sympathy. It's great. This has happened to me my whole life, you know. So I don't know, when we start talking about the older brother, there's something in this story, right? The older son approaches this whole issue differently, and yet there's a lot of similarity, right? One of the most striking points is that both of these sons want the father's things, but don't necessarily want the father or a relationship with him. And so when we think about the older son, the older brother, in Luke 15, right, it outlines, we've heard the story here, but basically he's out in the field and he's angry. So it says in the Bible, it says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. Of course he was in the field. Why? Because he's doing what he's supposed to. Because he's supposed to be out there working and taking care of everything, right? Holding the place together, making the family farm run. He's out there working. He's doing what he's supposed to. But then it says that the older brother became angry and refused to go in. You see, he says, hey, what's all the commotion here? Like, I'm out here working my tail off here in the field. What is this, a party happening back at the estate? Like, what's going on? He asks the servant. The servant says, oh, yeah, your brother's home. My brother's home? That guy's dead to me. What do you mean he's home? And there's a party? Like, can you imagine the dissonance that's happening for him? Yeah. It says he became angry and he refused to go. I wonder if we can identify with that. Not being able to be happy in the moment for the brother, you know? Why is he angry? I think it's important that we understand why he's angry. When you think about it, right, it's this perceived injustice. That's not right. We all have that inside of us. Well, that's not fair. They should do this. They should not do that. That's not fair. That's not right. That's wrong. But this sense of being wronged, right? Like, he can't be happy for him. Why? Because he was right the whole time. This older brother was right the whole time. Being right the whole time. You know, I accidentally taught my daughter a phrase. There's many. Here's the latest. You're going to like this one. It's like, don't go over there, don't do that. Oh, no, don't. You're going to smack your head on that. Please stop, right? Trying to reason and explain why. And then inevitably what happens? Smack. See, I told you were going to hit your head. And so now what's funny about kids is they just use this stuff completely out of context, right? So they come in, they just go, I'll just be doing something. She'll be like, see, I told you. I'm like, what? I was right the whole time. You know, the older brother's like, I was right the whole time. See, I told you he was going to do that, right? I told you that he was not going to be here for the family. I told you that something was going to happen. And what happens is this son, he makes everything about himself. He makes the whole story about him in this moment. He doesn't really understand where the father's coming from. He could care less about the brother. It's all about him and his own feelings, right? That sense of injustice, that deep sense of being wronged. And what happens is that he misses the moment that his father cares the most about. There is this beautiful moment of the lost being found, the dead being alive, right? One who was so gone and beyond that we never thought they would come back. That moment right there, he misses that moment because he lets this sense of being wronged, this see I told you attitude, He lets that completely derail his whole perspective, and he makes the whole situation about himself. You see, it says he's angry. You ever heard of anybody? What's another way to say angry is? They were in a blind rage, right? It means really, really angry. Why is it a blind rage? Because there's something about when you get angry. There's something physiological, right? Scientifically speaking, that your focus narrows. When you get angry, the reason why it's a blind rage and why you're blind to things is because all you see is the anger, right? Your whole focus just narrows in, and you miss all of the things that are going on. This older brother misses the moment that his father cared most about. Right? Because when you think about these stories, right, and every parable of Jesus is driving at one thing. It's like, what is the heart of the Father? What is at the core of this? It's not about the rules and regulation, the do's and the don'ts. Those can provide you some good structures in life, but it's not the secret. Just being more disciplined in your life does not always get you the result you want. It's like when people say, like, something bad happens to somebody, right? What do people say? Karma. Told you. To which I say, I don't believe in karma. For many reasons, actually, but I know plenty of great people. Terrible, awful tragedy has fallen on them. They don't deserve that. The most terrible things that happen in our life, we don't deserve it. I don't really think karma's a thing. But there's something inside of us, right? Like I followed the rules and I made that sacrifice. So if somebody else doesn't, well, that's on them, and that's what you get. See, I told you. Outrageous. You know, we live in an outrage culture, don't we? And I'd like to kind of qualify what that outrage is. Outrageous. His behavior was outrageous. I want to qualify this anger, this narrowing of the focus, right? This selfish kind of absorption of the moment, focused only on my needs and how this has affected me, how I've been hard done. I have been wrongly treated. I have been mistreated. And I want to call it the term of self-righteous indignation. Really the emotion that he's experiencing, right? The Bible says angry. I think it more accurately when I started reading, I was like, okay, how can I say this in a new way, right? We read the Bible verses and we read them several times, and sometimes they kind of just, the words kind of phase in, but when you really get down to it and you think about the motivations in this story, about the character development, integration, how they're working with each other and how they play off each other, it's self-righteous indignation. I am outraged. And the problem with this, right, is it's about being filled or showing conviction of being morally superior, more righteous than others, or smugly virtuous. You like that one? Smugly virtuous. When you're saying I told you so, right, you're not being virtuous. Yeah, that's right, that's what you get. You're being smugly virtuous, which is a lot less flattering. You see, we start to say, that's not right, that's not fair, they should do it this way. They're not doing it the right way, that's not fair. Why shouldn't, though, we distinguish when people aren't doing things correctly? Why shouldn't I be able to confront somebody and say, well, you really shouldn't be doing that, and here's why you should be doing all the things that I say because my perspective reigns superior. And we start to say, and why can't I say that? Well, I've got a couple of reasons why you can't say that. One, it's not real. They aren't doing it the way they're supposed to. It's not happening. Your way that you think is better in life, no one's doing it. It's not the reality of the moment, and it's really a big old waste of your time, right? It actually makes us more unhappy, this sense of self-righteous indignation. It makes us a lot less happy because we're so focused on somebody else who didn't do something, and I think there's a great question we can ask ourselves. How much time and energy have you given to this? Think about the last time that somebody just betrayed you. They did you wrong, right? Did something that You weren't supposed to do it. I told you not to do it, and there you go. Now you did it. You know, the truth is that we think about, like, how much time did we spend on that? Like, how much energy do we devote to those situations? How many times do we take that situation and we unpack it, we kind of justify our actions, we kind of demonize somebody else's actions, and then we go tell like 10 different people the story about what happened, and they all say, yeah, definitely, I'm on your side with that. Have you ever noticed when you're telling these stories to people, what happens? Self-righteous indignation, as you start to tell the story to other people, you want to know what happens? Everyone agrees with you because they just get your side of the whole story. Yeah, that's unbelievable. They shouldn't have done that to you. You know, I think in our culture today, right, like, we have to think about that, you know. We want to do what is right. But if what we're doing is actually just being offended, you know, like the brother in the story, you know, he says, all these years, I've been slaving away for you. I haven't disobeyed any of your orders. I've done everything I'm supposed to, and you never even gave me a goat. Let alone a fattened calf, right, which is the big party. You couldn't even give me a goat. I followed all the rules. I did everything I was supposed to. I ticked all the boxes, checklist complete, everything's in line. I behaved completely appropriately. Why would you let this son come back to the table? Have you not noticed it's smaller? And yet the father does. In fact, the father, it says, again, he goes out to plead with him. Because again, it's about the heart of the Father, and this story is trying to tell us the heart of God for us in our life. When we've made mistakes, but at the same time, sometimes we got to get a little bit rattled in our safe little boxes of rules and regulations. Ultimately, we can't work and manage ourselves into the good graces of God. This idea of grace, of being saved by grace, is so big to be a Christian, because the fact is you don't deserve it. And none of you do. But sometimes we can't help but slip into that mode where it's like, well, I mean, I'm better than them though, right? At least I'm not them. Just slipping into it, right? Making it all about ourselves, narrowing the focus, we become angry, and what happens is ultimately it hurts our relationships, you know? Holding on to the grudges and other things. You know, Jesus talks about living a life of forgiveness. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's the only thing that brings you back into community. You can't be in a relationship with anybody, and at the first sign, oh, well, they made a mistake. They did something I didn't like. I guess I'm out of here. There would be no relationships on planet Earth, right? Those of you that have been in a long relationship, you know, right? Like, if there's not some kind of path to forgiveness, to reconciliation, to coming back together, to like getting back on the same page, the relationships just devolve. And so many people nowadays, especially, right, like, you know, the question I always like to joke with y'all about, right, like, but you don't like need to go to church to be a Christian, right? My answer is always, you know, well, no, but yes, right? Because the truth is that the plan to save this world, the plan of rescue, of liberation, of restoration for our planet, Jesus said the church is going to do it. Well, if you want to be the church is not just the building, right? I mean, this building is nice. We got a lot of nice facilities here. This is wonderful. But the church is the collection of people. And if the church is a group of people, then it's about the relationships that we have with one another, which means we got to find ways to get out of this cycle. We have to break this cycle of just, I'm going to pack up my toys, I'm out of here, I'm gone. Or, I didn't like the way they treated me. I can't believe they said that to me. Guess what? I'm gone. I ain't never coming back. God challenges us to a different way, because the relationship is what's most important. In the same way that both sons don't care much about the father in the relationship, right? They want the father's things. They don't want the father. One says, I'm going to get the things by demanding it, claiming my birthright, saying, give me my inheritance, and taking off. But the older son also just wants the things, But he's thinking about long term, what does that look like? And he looks to get the things by staying put and following all the rules. You see, one says, give me what I'm owed and I'm out of here. One says, oh, I'm going to stick around because I expect to get what I'm owed. But when he misses the heart of the Father and that this moment that the Father has waited for, the most important moment, he just misses it. And I think about the Father's perspective, right? Why does he go out to plead with the older son? Wasn't dignified in those days, right? The same way that when he runs to meet the younger son when he's coming home, he also goes to the older brother who's mad and angry out in the field and, probably just angrily using the tools. I think of the heart of the Father because what he wants is he wants him to share in the joy that has just happened. There's a feast and a celebration. There's a coming back together. There's a reconciliation that's just happened. One that was dead is alive. One that is lost is now found. And the Father wants him to connect to that sense of joy. He wants him to be a part of the moment. And he knows that his self-righteous indignation will not let him do it. The Father goes and it says he pleads with him. He wants him to share in the joy. And I bet God feels this way about us all the time. How often do you think God looks at our relationships in our life? When we act in those ways of self-righteous indignation, those moments, right? The red mist that descends and the narrowing of the focus in those angry moments, what does God want in those situations? You see, we say, I told you so, you got what you deserve. That's what you get for not following the rules. But what does God actually want out of that? He wants someone to come to realization of what you're doing is not good for you. What you're doing does not lead you toward life. What you're doing leads you further away from me and not into communion. The heart of God really says, I wish they could get over that, the Father's sitting there how do I make this work? You ever been in that position? You got two people in your life that are angry at each other and you're like, how can I get them back at this table? It's a terrible, very hard position to be in. If only they could get along. But that's why the way of forgiveness is so hard. It's hard to, especially when you have this sense I'm right, to be able to forgive somebody is really hard. And when you think about that, it's I was right, you were wrong, you got what was coming to you, right? When you think about that, it's really it's a deep sense of pride. In our world today, right, we talk about pride. When the Bible talks about pride, it's a sin. One of the most dangerous ones, actually, because it inflates the ego. It says, my whole life is just about my own momentary feelings and what I want, right? Pride says, they can't tell you what to do. You go do your own thing. Those people at church are telling you that you can't do this, or you don't like those rules, or this is not part of what it means to be a Christian. Go start your own church. You see, pride, it pumps us up, we can have too much pride in the life that we're living. Our own way. Well, I don't know if I think that's right, so I'm going to go my own way. And it's a lot like us, right, when we think we can make it on our own. This whole idea of you can't performance manage your way into God's good graces. That's not how God works. God is full of grace and mercy and infinite love and compassion, and God wants to bring everybody back together, back to the table. But the fact is if you're full of pride and you've got that self-righteousness happening, what happens is you're really saying that merit and reward ought to be guaranteed. I think there's a lot of value in the term meritocracy, meaning I can work for what I get. In other words, I think it's good to an extent in life. But when we start to talk about relationships or our relationship with God, and we just expect that I followed all the rules. I've done everything I'm supposed to. I'm sitting over here breaking my back while everybody else is partying at the house. I'm owed. Where's my guarantee? Where's my reward that should be coming to me? At the same time, when we read this from the older son's perspective and what he says, right? Where he says, all these years I've been slaving away for you. I've done everything that you ordered me, right? All that depersonalizing that he's doing with the Father, like what he's doing in that moment, he's playing the victim, right? I've been wronged. I've been mistreated. He's full of hyperbole. He's exaggerating. I've always done everything you did. I never did anything bad. I'll tell you that. When you hear people in your life start using those words of always, never, you do this every time, just realize, like, it's nonsense, right? That's called hyperbole. No one always or never does anything, right? You always do that. No. But that's what he's doing, right, in this moment. He's playing the victim. He's full of hyperbole, and then he's actually using guilt against the Father, too. Well, I've done all this for you. Aren't I owed? And it really comes back to that sense of being owed, right? You know, he's so mad and so angry, he even, when he says, this son of yours, not your brother, not Joey or whatever his name is, right? Like, this son of yours, y'all have done that before, right? Those of you with children know. You need to talk to your daughter. I'm done with this. I can't even handle this anymore. Whenever they're in trouble and you've had enough, we throw our hands up. We say, like, that's your daughter. You figure it out. You know, we just say, like, right, this son of yours. It's distancing language. What it is like we're not going to name that person so that we can kind of remove ourselves so we can stay angry. We keep our, like, I mean, like, isn't that understandable, though? Isn't the older brother's perspective, like, he wants to be right? He's like, hey, this guy, like, it's a third of our entire wealth. Gone in a flash. But you see, we have this contrast of two sons. And the contrast is about what keeps them away from the table. The reason why the message to come home is so strong, the reason why the invitation for each of us, especially at Easter, why this table is so important for us to look at during the Easter season, is it's about coming together. But you see, the contrast between sons, we can find ourselves in both of these places at different times. We can behave like both of these sons. And sometimes we're different sons, but the idea is that there's a contrast between the two. What Jesus is pointing out is he's saying, actually, they're both wrong. He's saying both of these paths toward life that you think can get you there, one of self-righteousness and one of just complete selfishness, that both of these paths can keep you away from the table. You see, for one, it's shame. Keeps them away from the table. For the other, it's pride. And it's both shame and pride can keep you away from this table. Imagine if the younger son never came home. How often might that happen where somebody does something like that son in the story, but they never take the step to come home? They let their shame keep them from the table. How many people do that when they think about God in their life and saying, like, well, you know, I've done so much bad stuff. I'll never forgive myself. And if I can never forgive myself, how in the world could God forgive me? But the truth is, when we think about the heart of the Father's willing to do everything. He's willing to give everything for the Son. I think what gets me, right, this anger response from the older son, this self-righteous indignation that rises up, like, he sees his father do this for a son who doesn't deserve it. Might not there be a little part of him that says, like, would you do that for me? You see, the truth is when you think about those folks who get wrapped up in that kind of indignation, that offense, right? What happens is like they're not always like the most put together people. You see, on the outside they can be, but on the inside they can be fragile. They can have a low self-esteem. They can have places in their heart that are not healed. It's a defense mechanism, right? It's easier to get angry and lash out at other people and point the finger, right? All of a sudden you're in this uncomfortable situation. Somebody says, like, hey, but you did this. That's not right. Why would you do that to me? You say, well, it's because they did it. Or it's because, well, at least I'm not as bad as them, right? And so then the blame happens because we're trying to defend ourselves, right? It's both shame and pride that can keep us from the table. And this story is a great contrast of those who want to live by justice and merit, and then those who want to live by grace. The truth is that this older son, he needs to come home. He's out in the field and he refuses. And the story leaves us as a cliffhanger, right? But the truth is that the reason why the story ends without the resolution, right? Did he go? Did he not? What happened? Did that younger son still get part of the estate? Whatever happened to the father? Did the sons reconcile, or did they fight? Did they take it to court? It leaves it on the edge because what it's doing is it's positioning a choice for each one of us. This story is an invitation for each one of us to hear the words of Jesus say, "Come home and come to the table." This is where the healing happens. The relationship and the heart is the most important thing. The stuff is just stuff. The heart is what matters. Choosing to come to the table, right? To coming to forgiveness and freedom. And that's for both brothers. Shame and pride, it doesn't really matter. Both need forgiveness. Whether we need to forgive the people who've wronged us, or we need to forgive ourselves, or we need to forgive those who've shown grace to someone else when we shouldn't be mad. We shouldn't. We all need the forgiveness and freedom of the table. And I think there's this song by David Crowder. We play it a lot before communion. Because communion is coming to the table. When we think about Maundy Thursday, right, that Thursday right before Easter, where Jesus celebrated the Passover with the disciples, the Last Supper, they're at a table. They come to the table, and there's a communion that happens. And we're going to celebrate communion today because the invitation for each one of us is to come to the table. But there's a song that we always regularly will play a video, right? So there's one, and it's by David Crowder, right? And he says, "Lay down your burden, lay down your shame," right? Come to the table. The invitation for each of us, not only today, but for this Easter season and way beyond, right? Is to come to the table, but if it's your burden and your shame, or if it's your pride, the idea of forgiveness is here at the table. Lay down your anger and your pride. Lay down your guilt and your shame. Both of those things keep us from the table, and what Jesus says is, I can take those away right now. He can do anything, and what he wants to do is bring us back to this table. Older brother. I like to think he came back to the table. I like to think that there's a wake-up moment. Maybe it was immediate, I don't know. But I like to think at some point, both sons come back to the table. I believe ultimately this is how the story ends for us on planet Earth, right? We all feast, right? We all come to the table. We're all with Jesus. We're all restored and whole and brand new. But joining the feast, right? If he does choose to come back and he chooses to join the feast, he has to choose God's way. You see, God's way is different than our way. The human way says, well, you did wrong and that's what you get and there you go. And it's real easy to slip in that mode, but the truth is that God's way is about mercy, it's about grace, it's about love. It's why the words of the gospel is not only good news, it's absolute scandal. To forgive someone who's done you so wrong and so badly, right? I'm not saying be a doormat in your life. You shouldn't be a doormat, okay? I want to be clear on this. And if somebody's being abusive, you need to get out. Just want to be really clear on this, right? But being able to forgive people is not just about letting people off the hook. It's about your heart connected to God. And I got to tell you, forgiveness only happens with God's power. Because human-wise, it doesn't really make much sense, does it? Why would we forgive? We wouldn't do that. But if we're going to join the feast, right, we're going to join in God's way. We're going to live life God's way. We want to be agents of peace. We want to be agents of mercy. We want to show the kind of grace that God's not only given us, but we've got to be able to give it to each other as well. And we've got to let people know. That's the good news of the gospel, The table is where God's way works. And that's our invitation today. lay it down. And you know, next week is Palm Sunday. And a picture of Palm Sunday, right? Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem just before the Passion Week and his ultimate death, burial, and then resurrection. It's a pivotal moment in the story of who Jesus is. It's a pivotal moment in what we see here as people who live on planet Earth, and then the cosmic relevance and plan that God has for our life. But Palm Sunday is not just like God sending Jesus in, is God's doing everything to get us. God's giving everything to show us that he loves us. And God was willing to send the older brother that we actually need. Jesus is that older brother that should be there. You see, the older brother should come back to the table because that should be his role in the forgiveness and reconciliation cycle. And so when I think about Jesus entering it, right, like Jesus becomes the brother that we really need. And so today, we're going to do communion, right? It's a beautiful chance and opportunity to bring whatever you're struggling with. I think it's really easy to become self-righteous. I think it's really easy to be triggered and be part of the outrage culture. I think it's really easy to be so full of guilt and shame that you beat yourself up and try and self-sabotage your way out of relationship with God. But the invitation for each of us is to come to the table, to be with Jesus, to be restored and healed and whole. In the name of Jesus.